All right, guys, my name's Kyle Hammond. I'm the program coordinator for early intervention. For those of you who don't know what early intervention is, we're a program based out of Summit County Public Health. We work with kids and families with developmental delays. So thanks to an awesome grant that I got from the Summit Foundation, I've been able to put together this string of trainings where I've been able to pair my service providers with all of you guys, the people that are kind of on the ground floor, the teachers, the parents, and really trying to get our knowledge out. So if anyone doesn't have any questions around early intervention, I do have some pamphlets and some cards up here. Otherwise, I'm gonna leave it to Gina. So this is Gina Luck. She's an OT and our feeding specialist for early intervention. So yeah, I will leave it to her.
Hello, thank you all for coming today. I appreciate your time. I'm going to be talking about transitioning to solids, that time from 5 months to 13 months. The learning objectives that I'm hoping to share with you all is the understanding that eating is a very complex skill that we all take for granted. And also when to offer solids to your infant, what foods to start with. There's a lot of debate around that. When to add higher textured foods to baby's diet. And then how to offer the foods, so responsive feeding. And within responsive feeding, the importance of setting up the child to succeed. So proper posture, spoon feeding techniques, importance with playing and exploring our food to learn about it, and then feeding strategies for all the different age groups, along with cup introduction, breastfeeding, bottle weaning, and then some red flags for problem feeding and when to ask for help. So, like I said, eating is an extremely complex task. It requires all of our organ systems to be working correctly for feeding to succeed. It requires many muscles of our body systems that often compete. It requires our postural stability muscles and our respiratory and our feeding muscles. And just for an example, the swallow just one swallow takes 26 muscles and 36 cranial nerves. Eating is also the only task that children do that requires all of our sensory areas. So for kids that have a tendency to get overstimulated, it's a very challenging task for them. They have to smell it, taste it, look at it. It changes when you take a bite. Also, many factors that can impact feeding with these are, again, like I said, the positioning, the self-regulation, the sensory motor, all of that. A study that somewhat draws some attention to that is a longitudinal study that was done in England with a rather large sample size. Around 14,000 children were studied for 5 years, and they took parent questionnaires from 6 months, 15 months, 24, 38, and 54 months, and looked at what the parent report was. And 40% around age 1 month and 6 months reported that their children were slow feeders, really showing that it does take a good amount of time to learn to eat. Also, at that 15, 24, and 38 and 54 month, you can see the percentages there that many families found that it was difficult for feeding, that they reported that it's a challenge. And so I'm hoping today to help you learn some strategies on how to make eating a little bit easier for families and their kiddos. So, when to offer solids. So, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends offering complementary foods when kids are developmentally ready. And so, what developmentally ready means, they do say between 4 to 6 months, but really it's what our kids are doing. It's if they have that good head control, trunk control, postural stability, then if they're sitting for about that 10 to 15 seconds, they can even be self-propping. That's letting us know that their digestive system is maturing, their trunk stability is there, and they're going to be ready to tolerate those solids. Again, of course, you want those when they're showing that they're interested in eating. They're looking at your food and reaching for the spoon. And then later on when you're offering those spoons, that after a couple trials, that they're learning and they are able to bring their tongue from the front to the back to bring those solids where the food's not just coming out every time. So, what to offer are first foods. And that's where again, the American Academy of Pediatrics, they are strongly recommending that we offer foods that provide the nutrients that we're needing around that half of the year, so the iron and the zinc. And so 2 food groups that typically do that are iron fortified cereals and our meats. Now, the cereals are a great strategy to start with first because they're easy on the digestive system, they're easy on the sensory system, meaning less taste and less to look at. They're white, very easy to manage on that standpoint. Proteins, they can be a little bit harder on the digestive system, and because they're a protein, there's a little bit more likelihood of an allergic reaction. And so, again, you could also offer fruits and vegetables. There's a camp that really says that, to try to start with that first, but it is child dependent, I would say. If kids are getting overstimulated with the big flavors, going back to the rice cereal. Let's see. Oh, and then the number one thing is also how you're offering it. So you're offering a one food with a single ingredient for that 3 to 5 days to test for any allergies. It's extremely important. So then now, how do we know to move on to more advanced textures? Again, we're looking at what the child is doing. So we talked about the 5 to 6 month. So usually it's thinner baby foods, thinner purees. Around 6 to 7 months, we're looking that they can sit independently and hold an object. Again, that's a big key factor that we can start a little bit thicker of the purees, the stage 1 and stage 2. What we're looking for oral motor wise, we're looking for some munching patterns and also a little bit of lip closure. 7 to 8 months, we're looking at, can the kiddo sit and keep their balance and rotate for a toy without falling down? That's when we know, again, we can continue with those stages, but now offering fruits and vegetables and all the variation. And the number one thing I believe at this age is really varying those foods. So testing out the allergies, but trying to get the kids to have as much taste variation as possible. Because later on when I talk about how to get kids to eat healthy, that very early stage is extremely important. What you should see oral motor wise at this age is really that they're starting to get that upper lip, being able to pull and draw the food kind of off of that spoon, which is really going to help them with the cup introduction. Then going from 8 to 9 months, that's when we start transitioning to the mashed table foods, and again, we're seeing much more tongue movement from side to side, which is coming along with that crawling, how they're using their bodies from side to side. It all correlates. At this age, kiddos might be doing more gagging, which is absolutely typical, because they're still learning moving that tongue, and if that tongue just stays front to back, when they get a little lump on their tongue, they'll have that tendency to gag. And the 9 to 11 months is a big stage for kiddos. And that's where, of course, they're pulling to stand and they're learning to cruise on furniture, but they are getting much more of that tongue movement, and we can start transferring them to those hard meltable solids and soft cubes. And what you're looking for oral motor before you move on to something else is that they're starting to kind of chew with the diagonal movement. It's no longer just up and down. And the reason I wanted to present a lot of these things is so you will know what is developmentally appropriate for kids. So if some kiddos, you're just seeing that they are having a really hard time with pieces of food, you can look at the other motor pieces. Are they doing this with their jaw? Are they cruising on furniture? And maybe they're not quite there yet. You may have to step back or wait a little bit longer with an earlier texture. Let's see. So, how to offer solids. I'm imagining you probably have all heard this term, responsive feeding. And it's basically that reciprocal communication between the child and the caregiver during the feeding process. And there were a couple studies done showing the effects and the powerfulness of responsive feeding. And what they did is with this study, they found that the key steps of responsive feedings were basically that the child displays the hunger signals through whether it's facial expressions, motor movements, or maybe vocalization. Then the caregiver properly interprets that and promptly provides them with a predictable response. And the same thing when the kiddos are getting full, they're showing those signs of getting full, and the parent consistently removes the food and stops. Key principles are that pleasant, warm, nurturing feeding environment. And a big factor was the child seated face to face with the caregiver, of course, so they can watch those expressions and model. The consistent reciprocal communication, the predictable feeding schedules to help ensure the child is hungry when the food is offered, and of course offering the developmentally appropriate foods, and that's what those couple slides were for before. And basically it's truly the feeding response needs to be emotionally supportive and contingent upon the signal and developmentally appropriate. So these are some, of course, engagement cues, what we see with our kiddos when they are engaged. You see the alert state, their bodies are calm, their fingers are open, they're bright-eyed, they're leaning in, they've got open mouths for the spoon, versus disengagement cues where, you know, they're furrowed brow, they're flailing their arms, they're kind of doing that finger splay when we see that kind of get stressed out, or that halt hand, and they're pushing away or closing their mouths or spitting out food. So here's a couple examples of that. You can see the engagement with the baby is watching mom, even watching mom's mouth. You can see the eye contact, ready, leaning in, and then here on the other side you can see all the signs of all done. Extension, grimacing, turning away. So here's an example. This is definitely probably not responsive feeding, you know, no sneaking in the spoon. Here. So the other thing talking about was positioning for eating. It's extremely important, as I had talked about, to support those muscles that compete with the breathing and the postural and the oral motor. There was a video that was really powerful. I wish I could find it. They had kiddos that they slowed down, so they had some postural control. They did a slow-mo video, and they showed the kiddos taking a bite when they didn't have a stable in their trunk, and you could just see their tongue movement went right back to midline. It was no longer from side to side. Then they put the kiddo in a fully stable seating position, and instantly, I mean, there's no OT, no therapy, instantly that tongue was moving from side to side much more efficiently. So I can't speak to the power. I mean, it really is important. It allows for better hand-mouth coordination, because if you're stable in the trunk, you have better reaching forward. Another important one to me, it prevents aspiration and fluid in the airways, especially if you're walking around and eating, improves digestion. And then, of course, with increased postural, it's going to limit fatigue and increase attention to the task. And so here you can kind of see, often with my postural recommendations, it's definitely based on the kiddo. So this first one, usually around the 5 to 6 month mark, 5 to 6.5 months, when they're still working on that trunk stability, having them in a chair where they don't have to do anything postural-wise, it's all taken care of, that their trunk and their head are fully supported, and they can just really work on the breathing and the eating part. And then around 7 to 8 months, when they're doing that trunk rotation, then you can put them in a chair here in the middle where they're upright at 90 degrees. What I like about this picture is it shows that getting the hips to 90 degrees and the knees to 90 degrees is extremely important. For some kiddos, it's a little bit harder in our high chairs, but you can always put a rolled up blanket or something to push them forward to still get that 90 degrees in the knees. The 90 degrees at the ankles comes into play being really important around that 12 to 13 month mark. You can see here with the kiddo a creative way of just using the small chair to get those ankles in 90 degrees. So a lot of that is what I had just talked about. What I want to encourage you all to do is that when you see a kiddo leaning one way or the other, or leaning forward, to think about putting lateral support at their trunk to keep them upright. If you're seeing them slouching down, building a little triangle and putting it underneath their bottom, so their bottom will be, their pelvis will be tilted a little bit back to stop that slouching. And here's some examples of that. So you can see, even with the older kiddos, when they don't have the foot support, they're looking for stability by arching back or fixing with their legs. And here, with this little one, I want you to all swallow your saliva right now. And then I want you to tilt your head and try to swallow. It's a lot more force, a lot more difficulty trying to push that through. And again, if we want to start feeding out easy, we want to make them to have the most success they can. So, thank you. So how to offer that first spoon feeding. What I often say is the goal for ages 5 to 7 months is really, it's all about play. It's not about volume, it's about exploration, it's about touching, it's about playing with it, it's about learning the consistency of it, and it shouldn't be changing any of the volume from the milk, so it should still be around 32 ounces. Spoon technique, the spoon technique that I use was created by Dr. Toomey with the SOS approach to feeding at the Star Center. And she has broken it down into several little steps about she's really pulling out the responsive feeding piece here, where you're making eye contact, you're showing them the spoon, you're waiting for them to look at the spoon, and you're moving towards them. Another little key feature is that you're showing them the expectations of what you're hoping for them to have. So you are opening your mouth, ah, and giving them an auditory, a sound for them to know that that spoon is coming. Often kids at the very first couple times, they don't know to open their mouth. And so you can put the spoon and the food on the tip of their lips and help them use that sound to help them push it posteriorly back for the swallow. What I would really say, and it's not easy to do, especially for these first kids that are first learning to spoon feed, is trying not to, scrape their face when the food is going to come out. But with kiddos that are just learning, that stimulation of scraping their face with the spoon and putting the food back in can be very overstimulating and lead to decreased sitting tolerance. The other thing that has been found that can be pretty helpful is that kiddos that do not like to be cleaned or have their hands washed, do not clean them in the feeding chair. We don't want them to associate anything not so enjoyable with that chair. And so I would say take them out into the kitchen and then do your nice massage cleaning and gentle wiping, but not in the chair. So what if the baby refuses the first feeding, which I'm sure all of you have heard this happens often. It is definitely typical. Again, like I said, it's a very multisensory task, and it's okay to try again in a week or in a couple days. Some strategies that I use for kiddos that are really starting to have some challenges with it is I will just put a little bit of dab of the food on the tray, and I will show them that I'm touching it and I'm bringing it to my lips. You know, that I think it's safe, that it's fine. And if you, even getting them to touch it for one session, that is progress and great for a lot of kids. Other things I'll do is I will use little food dippers. They're the small little pre-feeding utensils, and I'll put a little dab of puree on both sides and let them practice bringing it to their mouths. Many kids, if they get that taste by their controlling it, the next time that you go to offer the spoon will be much easier for them to tolerate. If the baby continues to show signs of disinterest, other things you can try out is playing with the consistency of the cereal, making it thinner or thicker. And being an OT, I can't leave out the importance of getting messy during eating. Of course, it is the first real sensory messy play that they can do safely. Putting them in a sandbox or in small dirty things, getting to the mouth isn't as safe. But food, they can get that all over them. It's so important. And how they are with touching foods is it's the beginning mapping of learning and understanding their hands, learning the discrimination of what's cold, what's wet, what's dry, and it sets the foundation for even handwriting. So you guys do an amazing job here of doing messy play, but starting off with eating is a great step. And then there are studies showing that tactile defensiveness is linked to picky eaters. They don't know if that's it's a correlation right now in the studies, not necessarily a causation, but it's something that's we're looking at more. Let's see, 6 to 7 months. This is where you can switch to adding, so let's say you're adding new flavors into the flavors that you're already offering. So maybe you're offering baby cereal, now you can offer in a little bit of the protein or the fruits and vegetables. And again, doing the allergy test for 3 days is important. Let's see. I already talked about the more variation of the flavors earlier on, the better the nutrition and the desensitization of taste. Starting at this age, I'll often use 3 spoons. So I'll have a spoon that I am spoon feeding the kiddo, and then giving the kid 1 spoon or 2 spoons to hold. This helps with that co-feeding piece, that they can practice this movement while I put a little dollop on their spoon, and then spoon feed them. And I use that technique throughout their age levels, and it becomes even more important when kids get to that independence piece, that they'll already be able to start bringing their hands to their mouth. Okay. 7 to 8 months, the difference with the spoon feeding technique with this is helping the kids learn that lip closure on the spoon. What I'll often tell parents is this is the time holding the spoon in their mouth and just letting them wait a little bit to close that tongue onto the spoon to pull it off. If we tilt the spoon when we go into the mouth, we're doing all the work for them because we're kind of just dumping it on their tongue. So really trying to go in and letting them pull it and do their own work by getting it off the spoon at this age. And at this age, they're also, depending on their hunger and their interest in it, you can advance to a 3rd spoon feeding. So also at this, anywhere between 6 months to 8 months, we can offer cups. Again, I use the rule that if they're sitting and rotating, their trunk is ready for those cups. I typically recommend cups that are free-flowing, that even if they're just a slow little bit, that the liquid can come out, that they're not learning to suck with that forward tongue. And here in a little bit, there'll be a picture of it. So here's kind of an example of these free-flow ones that I often like to start with, but then have many different variations of cups. For the first time offering, I'd recommend that you both have a sip cup and model it so they know what to expect with it. And if they start to gnaw and chew on the cup, wiggle it a little bit so then they can get the liquid in and it stops them from chewing on it.
What are the brands of
The brands are, it's the Take and Toss, and then it's this new one that I found. I just saw that they are carrying it, I think, at our Target, the Even Flow Feeding Triple Flow, and it's a tilty trainer. And that one is nice too because they don't have to tilt it back as much, so they're not getting as much neck extension, and they can keep their heads in neutral. And again, with the first time that you're offering it, you're going to be kind of holding it for them and bringing it to them. I would still recommend whatever that sound is that you use when you go to give them a spoon, you do the same thing with the cup, whether it's the ah, and then bring the cup and help them practice kind of up and down. Let's see. So now, the 9 to 11 months age group, again, we'd already talked about that this is when we can offer them pieces of food. If they're consistently choking on those pieces of food, you have to look at how the tongue is moving. This is also the time where they're doing the object permanence exploration, where they're taking the food and watching it drop on the floor. And even at this age, you can let them, of course, let them still do that, but you can also start teaching them that they can drop it into a bye-bye bowl, or they can hand it to you, and so they're still getting that idea. Imitation starts to predominate, so modeling is even more important. So when you're sitting down and having your yogurt along with them is an excellent strategy. Here, some babies go through this flavor change a little bit early where their taste preferences may shift and they're starting to reject baby food. Often that usually happens more around 12 months, but 12 to 13 months, but you can see it here in this early stage. And so again, the strategies for these guys is continuing the co-feeding. The oral motor strategy is practicing taking little small pieces, putting it on your back molar, showing them chewing with your mouth open, showing them what your tongue is doing. It's a lot of open mouth chewing to show. Strategies to increase the attention at the table is typically let's say you start with one shape of the food. If they're starting to get bored with that, break it into pieces so it becomes a new food. Also, you can use it to dip into other foods, and then it becomes a new food. And then around 11 months, I try to offer open cups at least one time a day so they can really practice that lip closure with the swallow. Let's see. So the next stage is 12 to 13 months. At this age, because they're so visual and independent, this is a perfect time to take the tray off of the high chair or move them to the family table, so that all the other ages, it's great to have them at the family table if you can, but especially at this age, if they're not at the table, I would definitely recommend them getting them at the table. And again, they're going, like I had already talked about, this is often the time that they're refusing those baby foods and are going more towards table food purees. Also thinking about utensils at this age, they're often more for keeping their attention. So they are eating little pieces of cheese or something and they're losing attention. Giving them a pre-fork to kind of use the fork to stab to bring to their mouth is a better way to get that attention back to the task of eating. And then, I'm sure you guys all know, trying not to fall into the distraction of the trap of TV. And if they are losing attention and you want to keep their attention, offering them bowls to bang on, cups, spoons, anything but the TV or toys. Let's see. At this age, the oral motor skill is working on the bite and the pull so they don't overstuff their mouths. Again, same thing, exaggerating the chewing the food and placing the food on that back molar ridge. And then this is again where you're seeing that our PCPs are introducing, we're giving the dairy products. So, breast and bottle weaning. Well, do you have any questions? Oh, I guess I should wait. I'll wait till the end for questions on that. Breast and bottle weaning. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends to have our kiddos weaned by 16 months. A lot of the time it was 16 months, so I think it's anywhere between 16 to 18 months is what I had learned previously. Offering a cup at all the meals and snacks is going to be building that skill for the liquids. However, after weaning, usually you see that kiddos jump up. It takes about a month and you see their increase in the volume from a cup go up. Around 13 to 14 months, you can not start weaning, but you can start the process of moving the bottles so they are followed by the food, cup, and then immediately bottle. Not the morning one, but usually the 3 after that. So then the kiddos are naturally going to be weaning themselves. They'll have less desire to eat because they won't be as hungry. So phase 1 of bottle feeding around that 15 to 16 months. This again is a program that's from Toomey. And it's usually starting out with that morning bottle feed, that 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock, trying not to give the kiddo a breast or a bottle during that time. This can be, and then trying to distract them, get them playing for the first half hour, and then offering them solids is optimal if we can do that. But however, from my experience, there's so many kids that this is one of the hardest ones to remove. And so if we try a couple times and it doesn't work, then I will actually hold on to that first morning one a little bit longer in the weaning process. Then you continue the same pattern of the solids, breast, bottle, nap, or bedtime with the other bottles. During this time, it's helpful if you have your child to start to learn to accept different transitional objects. Do you guys use transitional objects here? Yeah, okay. So different transitional objects when you're feeding. So having that transitional object between you and the baby, and always the bottle right next to the breast for about 2 weeks to really build that attachment. Then after that 2 weeks of conditioning your child to the new schedule, then you can try to stop offering the bottles after meals, and hoping that most of those, usually they've already weaned themselves. And then if you're still seeing that they're having challenges, you can begin decreasing the volume and the concentration of the liquid in the bottle for the next couple weeks. Then Then after the very last week of kind of decreasing it down to the 25 to 75%, you can offer a child the sports bottle cups or a cup and water after nap at bedtimes. And of course, it's the limit setting and using the transitional object. So, foods to avoid for the first year of life are all the foods that can cause choking: the nuts, the seeds, the raw, hard to chew vegetables, the sticky foods. And I'm sure you probably all know no honey or milk until after 12 months. And no juice before a year of age, which is a new American Academy of Pediatrics recommendation. And really, even after that 1 to 3 years old, they recommend 4 or less ounces of juice. So, what contributes to children learning to like healthy foods? And they say it starts very, very early on through the amniotic fluid, the taste that you're eating, and then also through the breast milk. So, also associative learning, observation of the caregivers with eating, repeated exposures, and provide models and opportunities to explore food and food items without expectations to eat. And that's where the Toomey model comes into play, where you're really working on a successful food play. Is that, can they look at it? Can they look at it from a far away? Can they touch it with something? Can they touch it with a napkin, smell it? Then can they taste it a little bit and then maybe eat it? And then lastly, red flags for problem feeders. So what are the things that say that, that we're having a challenge? And so it's definitely poor weight gain. So if you're kind of going down 2 percentile or more, weight loss, if you're seeing choking, gagging, or coughing during meal times, problems with vomiting while eating or drinking. If you see any nasal reflux, so regurgitation coming out of the nose, that's something to question. History of traumatic choking incident. If the baby is unable to transition to purees by 10 months, that's also something we would want to look at. And unable to transition to table foods by 12 months. Other things are if the baby is not weaned off of baby foods by 16 months, where they're really wanting that super bland, smooth purees, you're going to want to be questioning why is that. If they're avoiding all specific textures, so they're not eating any purees, or they're not eating any soft cubes or something, or if they're only doing one food group, meaning just starches or something. If kiddos are eating less than 20 foods by age 2, typically we should have about 30 foods. And what you want, about 10 starches, 10 proteins, and then 10 fruit or vegetables. Then if you're seeing the kiddos crying and arching at most meals, if parents are reporting that it's a constant battle, or that at each, over several well child checks, they're saying my kiddo is a picky eater, is really struggling with this. And history of course, breathing coordination problems, along with frequent respiratory illnesses. That's another red flag. And I would say in summary, really for successful feeding is using the responsive feeding, letting them get messy, showing them versus telling them, and then offering variety and enjoying the adventure of it all. Yes. Any questions? That was a lot.